Hello, I'm Diane from Millhouse Quilts, and today we're going to talk about half-square triangles. A half-square triangle is a square made out of two triangular pieces. It can be any size you want, and it is so versatile. The first, most traditional way to make one is to add 7/8 of an inch to the finished size of this half-square triangle you need. Today I need a 3-inch half-square triangle. So I have cut two squares at 3 7/8 inches each. Now I'm going to lay these on the cutting mat and cut them in half diagonally. So to cut our squares, we line up our ruler corner to corner diagonally and then cut. All right, so we have cut both of our squares in half diagonally. We pick up one of each triangle, put them right sides together, match up the corners, match them up perfectly, and then we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down the diagonal. And your piece will look like this. Then we're going to go to the ironing board and carefully press it open, pressing towards the dark side. And your piece will look like this. Now you may notice we have two dog ears on here. So the next step will be to trim the dog ears. You need to use a ruler that has a 45-degree angle marked on it. And what I do is I line up the 45-degree line right even with the sewn edge. This is to be a 3-inch finished half-square triangle, which means my cut size will be 3½ inches. So I line this up. I have 3½ inches here, 3½ inches here, and I trim off this dog ear. Then you turn it around and just line up 3½ by 3½ and trim the second dog ear. And your half-square triangle is ready to use. Here's a second method of making half-square triangles where you get two triangles that you make at the same time. So you cut two squares of fabric the same size, and then put your two squares right sides together, and then you're going to draw a line. You want to mark on the lighter of your two fabrics. So you have the light one on top. I like to use the quilter's rule, which has these slots for making marks in. So I lay the rule on so I can see the tip of the square in that corner, and I see the tip of the square down here. Then I take a pencil and I carefully mark in each groove, and I move my fingers as needed, keeping the ruler straight all the way. Then when you take it off, you have this nice pencil line, which is your sewing guide. Using the pencil line as the guide, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch on either side of the line. And when you're all done, then we're going to cut it right down the pencil line. So now I'm ready to cut, and I have lined up my ruler right along the pencil line, and I'm going to cut basically tip to tip. We now have two half-square triangles after cutting on the line. And the next step is to take these to the ironing board and press them open. When you press them, you press towards the darker of the two fabrics, so it looks like this. And we now have a half-square triangle with two dog ears, which we will next trim off. So I take my ruler and I line up the 45-degree angle on the ruler with the 45-degree sewn line on the half-square triangle. When you do that, you have one dog ear sticking out up here. And when that's lined up straight, then you trim it off. And then turn it around. And at this time, you can just line this up square, trim the second one. And now we have a half-square triangle ready to go. Another way to make half-square triangles is what I call the free half-square triangles. And this is one of my favorite ways. Many times you have a block where you are adding a triangle to the end of either a rectangle or a square, and you start with a square that you put on and sew diagonally across. If you do this, and your piece is big enough as far as you think, I've sewed diagonally across, sew a second seam a 1/2 inch away, and then when you cut between here is the piece you're making, and under here is your free half-square triangle. Already done, nothing else to do. And you can go as small as you're comfortable with. You can make these any sizes, and it's a great way to just accumulate a whole bunch of free half-square triangles. All right, the fourth method, and this is another one of my favorites, is using a paper product named Thangles. And thangles come all sizes from 1/2 inch up to 6 inches, the biggest. They are strips of paper and they have marks on them. The rule with a thangle is you add 1/2 inch to your finish size. So you use a little bit narrower strip of fabric. The one I'm showing today is to make a 2-inch finished half square triangle. I have cut 2 pieces of fabric that are 2.5 inches wide. And I'm going to put these right sides together. And then I'm going to take the thangle and lay it on and pin it to these. When I lay the thangles on my strips, I notice where the 2 solid end lines are, and I make sure that they are within the ends of my strip. So I can see I'm good here. So I'm laying the strip on, and then I'm going to take some pins and pin this together, and I usually pin in the center part, because with the thangle, you sew on the dotted lines, and then you're going to cut on the solid lines. So I have sewed on each of the dotted lines. As you can see here, we have it sewed together. So the next step now is to trim on every solid line. So to cut these, I line up my ruler on the solid line, cut off the end, and then I usually just work down the line, cut the diagonal, cut the next square, diagonal, square, diagonal, and the end. So now we've got these cut, and we take them to the ironing board and iron them open. And one nice feature with thangles is we keep the paper on while we iron it, and that does help prevent distortion. You also don't need to lower your stitch length when you're using thangles. You can just sew with a regular stitch length, which makes it save time. We have our one dog ear to remove, and I line up the 45-degree line on my ruler with the sewn line, and then I just trim that one dog ear. Then the next step is to remove the paper, and this is the fun part. I'm right-handed, so I grip with my left hand, and I bend it back along the stitch line. And then grabbing right in the middle, it's one quick shot out that way. So here's one piece, and here is the other part of the paper, and it's off. The bigger sizes of thangles don't use strips of paper. They just have this narrow strip, and it has a line on here that you line up with the edges of your 2 pieces of fabric that you have pre-cut. And then it's again, sew on the dotted line, cut on the solid line, and you just have this one little piece of paper to take off. I hope you enjoy half square triangles as much as I do. They are such a versatile block. And look forward to our next video, which gives you some ideas of designs you can make using the half square triangle. Happy quilting from Millhouse Quilts.